What happens when the thin line between a bright future and the total ruin of an entire family depends on a single judicial decision made on a rainy Wednesday morning? Imagine a young man of just 21 years old, carrying the crushing weight of the world on his shoulders, entering a crowded courtroom, knowing that his chances are statistically nil and that his life is about to crumble before dozens of strangers and television cameras. He entered courtroom 209 of the Providence Municipal Courthouse not as a hardened criminal with a long criminal record, but as a terrified boy whose hands trembled so much that he could barely hold the crumpled summons between his sweaty fingers. To the spectators in the gallery, and to the court officer who had seen it all, he seemed just another case in the day's endless pile, another reckless Gen Z driver who disregarded traffic laws out of sheer irresponsibility and put innocent lives at risk on the city streets. The infraction was serious, the accumulated fines were astronomical for someone his age, and the state's cold recommendation was clear and merciless: immediate suspension of his driver's license and impounding of his vehicle. What no one in that room knew, however, was the devastating and profoundly human story hidden behind those speeding tickets. They didn't know about the sleepless nights in a freezing warehouse, about the whispered promise in a hospital bed with the acrid smell of disinfectant, or about the financial burden that young man carried in absolute silence so as not to worry his sick mother. But when Judge Frank Caprio, with his wisdom accumulated over more than 3 decades of magistracy and his gaze that seems to see into the human soul, decided to look beyond the bureaucratic paperwork and ask a simple question, what happened next became one of the most moving, raw, and shared moments in internet history. The lesson he taught that day wasn't about speed limits or penal codes, but about the essence of humanity, about empathy, and about the true meaning of sacrifice, leaving the entire courtroom, including the toughest and most hardened security officers, visibly struggling to hold back tears. But before we reveal the ending that broke the internet, went viral across continents, and transformed this young man's life forever, it's crucial to note an alarming statistic. Less than 20% of you watching this story right now are actually subscribed to the channel. If you believe in a justice system that prioritizes compassion over blind punishment, if you believe that listening is more important than judging, and if you want to see more stories of hope and redemption in such a cynical and hurried world, hit the subscribe button right now. This narrative goes far beyond a municipal court. It's a mirror of our society, a test of our own humanity, and you need to see how it ends to understand the power of a second chance. It was a particularly gray and oppressive Tuesday morning in Providence, Rhode Island. The rain lashed incessantly against the tall, old windows of the historic courthouse, creating a somber and melancholy atmosphere that seemed to reflect the heavy mood of many who waited inside, anxious for their verdicts. The air inside the courthouse was thick, heavy with the mingled smell of wet raincoats, stale coffee from vending machines, and a palpable anxiety emanating from the wooden benches where the defendants waited. The Providence Municipal Courthouse is not merely a place where cold laws are mechanically applied. Under the presidency of the legendary Judge Frank Caprio, that space has become a global stage where real life unfolds in all its raw complexity, unscripted and unfiltered. At 76, Caprio is a figure who commands immediate respect not through fear or force, but through an aura of paternal authority and a compassion that disarms even the most defensive. He sat on the high stool, adjusting his reading glasses with slow, deliberate movements, displaying the patience of someone who had heard every possible lie over 30 years, but who had miraculously never lost hope of finding truth and goodness in people. The courtroom was completely packed that particular morning, perhaps due to the bad weather that seemed to push everyone inside. There were university students biting their nails, worried about parking tickets they couldn't pay, construction workers with cement-stained clothes trying to resolve registration issues to return to work, exhausted mothers with crying babies, hoping for a moment of mercy. There was an electric energy in the air, a constant, nervous murmur that ceased abruptly, as if someone had cut the sound, when the court officer shouted in his booming voice, "Everyone stand!" Judge Caprio entered, his black robe swaying with dignity, and took his elevated position. He looked at the crowded gallery, his eyes scanning the crowd over his glasses, assessing the atmosphere of the room, sensing the tension. He knew from experience that each person sitting there had a complex story, an invisible battle, and his sacred mission was not only to judge the acts committed, but to understand the circumstances that led to them. At exactly 9:15, the clerk, with a serious expression, called the case that would change the tone of that day and be etched in the memory of all present. Case number 405. Daniel Oliveira, accused of 3 serious counts of speeding in a school zone, running a red light, and distracted driving. Daniel Oliveira rose from the hard wooden bench and walked to the central podium as if he were walking to the gallows. With each step, the sound of his shoes echoed in the sudden silence of the room. He was a thin, frail-looking young man, wearing a white button-down shirt that seemed a little too big for him, probably borrowed from someone larger, and black dress pants that had seen better days in many washes. His hair was carefully combed, in an obvious attempt to show respect, but his eyes told the true and painful story he was trying to hide. There were deep, dark, purplish circles under them, unmistakable marks of chronic exhaustion and sleep deprivation that no 21-year-old should bear on his face. He clutched his hands behind his back, clenching his fingers so tightly that his knuckles were white, almost without circulation, betraying the panic he felt. He didn't look at the television camera filming the procedure, nor at the audience that silently judged him. His eyes were fixed on the floor, on the worn carpet of the courtroom, and then, slowly, with visible effort, they lifted to meet the penetrating, analytical gaze of Judge Caprio. The judge, who had been leafing through the detailed police report on his desk, stopped the movement of his hands and looked over his glasses, frowning. He saw the boy's defensive posture, the visceral fear that made his shoulders slump, and something else, a deep, ancient, overwhelming sadness that seemed to emanate from the boy like a mist. The report in front of the judge was damning and alarming. Daniel had been caught by radar driving at 55 miles per hour in a strictly 25-mile-per-hour zone not once but twice in the same week, during school hours. Furthermore, there was a third, even more dangerous, fine for running a red light at 3 in the morning at a busy intersection. To any ordinary judge in any other court in America, this would be an open book case: a young, irresponsible, dangerous driver, a public menace. The standard sentence would be a 1-year license revocation, a hefty fine of thousands of dollars, and perhaps community service. Next case. But Frank Caprio is no ordinary judge. He saw something in Daniel's eyes, an absence of malice, an excess of desperation, that made him pause and reconsider the standard approach. "Good morning, Daniel," said the judge, his voice echoing through the sound system with a calmness that contrasted violently with the storm of nervousness inside the young man. "Do you understand the extreme gravity of the charges against you today? Speeding in school zones. We take the safety of our children very seriously here in Providence. A child crossing the street has no chance against a car at that speed. How do you plead to these charges?" Daniel cleared his throat, trying to find his voice, but no sound came out initially. He swallowed hard, tried again, and his voice came out as a broken whisper, trembling and weak. "Guilty, Your Honor. I am guilty of everything." The admission was quick, direct, without struggle, without flimsy excuses. Usually, defendants in that court try to argue, saying the speedometer was broken, that they didn't see the sign, that they were following the flow of traffic. Not Daniel. He accepted guilt immediately, bowing his head in shame, which, paradoxically, made Judge Caprio even more curious and alert. The judge leaned back in his large leather chair, making it creak slightly in the silence of the room, and interlaced his fingers over the file. "You are guilty," Caprio repeated, testing the young man, "and I see here in the officer's notes that you seemed disoriented and confused at one of the stops. Daniel, you are only 21 years old. I'm looking at your record here. You have an absolutely clean driving record since you got your license at 16. Nothing, not a single parking ticket. And then suddenly in the last 2 weeks, you accumulate enough infractions to lose your license 3 times. What happened in those 2 weeks, son? Did you suddenly decide that traffic laws no longer applied to you? Or is there something else going on in your life that I need to know?" The question hung in the air, heavy and inviting. The courtroom was in absolute silence. No one moved a muscle. All eyes, hundreds of them, were fixed on the back of the trembling young man. Daniel hesitated. He seemed to be struggling internally, waging a mental battle over whether it was worth exposing his private life, his pain and his humiliation, or simply accepting the punishment and walking away broken. "Your Honor," Daniel began, his voice gaining a little strength, driven by the sheer desperation of someone who has nothing left to lose. "I didn't want to run. I know it's dangerous. I swear on what is most sacred, I would never do anything to intentionally hurt anyone. But my life turned upside down and I lost control." Judge Caprio didn't interrupt him. He made a gentle gesture with his hand, inviting him to continue, signaling that he had all the time in the world. "Tell me," the judge said softly. "I'm listening. The court is listening." Daniel took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling rapidly, trying to control the trembling in his hands and voice. 6 months ago, my father passed away from a sudden and fatal heart attack. He wasn't ill, it just happened. He was the pillar of our home, the provider, the strength of our family. My mother, she didn't cope well with the shock. She fell into a deep, paralyzing depression, and 2 weeks ago, the stress triggered a serious autoimmune disease that prevents her from getting out of bed and working. I am an only child, Your Honor. I have no uncles, no grandparents here. Suddenly, overnight, everything fell on me. The rent, the bills, the food. Daniel paused for a moment to wipe away a stubborn tear that escaped his eyes, visibly embarrassed to be crying in public. I study civil engineering at the State University during the day. I have a partial scholarship for academic merit, but I need to keep my grades above a certain average to avoid losing it. If I lose the scholarship, I lose my future. But right now, I need to pay the rent that my father used to pay. So, I got 2 jobs to try and cover the shortfall. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his expression visibly shifting from technical judgment to genuine, deep human concern. The wrinkles on his forehead deepened. 2 jobs? He asked, incredulous. Besides full-time engineering school? Yes, sir, Daniel replied, his voice choked. I work in a logistics distribution warehouse carrying boxes from 4 in the afternoon until 10 at night. It's hard, physical work. And then I do food deliveries for an app during the early morning hours until 2 or 3 in the morning, because that's when the tips are better and there's less traffic. The fines, Your Honor, the first fine happened when I was leaving my shift at the warehouse, exhausted, and I received a call from my neighbor screaming that my mother had fallen in the bathroom and couldn't get up. I panicked. I didn't see the speedometer. I only saw my mother on the floor. I just wanted to get home to help her. The silence in the room was deafening, almost sacred. Even the clerk, who hears sad stories every day, stopped typing and looked at the boy with compassion. And the other tickets? Caprio asked softly, his voice now almost a paternal whisper. The second ticket was early in the morning, sir. I had only slept 3 hours that night. I was late for a final calculus stutter exam. If I missed the exam, I would fail the subject and lose my scholarship. I wasn't paying attention to the school zone speed limit. I was only thinking about differential equations and the fear of failing. And the red light, that was at 3 in the morning. I was coming back from the last pizza delivery. I think I blacked out for a second at the wheel, Judge. My body just shut down. I was so tired, so drained. When I saw the traffic camera flash, I woke up with a start and knew I had messed everything up. I knew it was over. Daniel lowered his head completely, defeated, his shoulders slumped under the weight of the confession. I know this isn't a legal excuse. I know the law is the law. I put people at risk, and I hate myself for it. But if you take away my license today, I can't make the early morning deliveries. If I don't make the deliveries, we won't be able to pay the rent at the end of the month. If we don't pay the rent, my sick mother and I will be on the street. I don't know what to do. I'm just trying to survive one day at a time, without drowning. Daniel's raw and honest confession hit the courtroom like a physical wave of emotion. It wasn't the typical story of a rebellious youth seeking adrenaline or defying authority. It was the tragic story of a desperate and loving son trying to hold the fragments of his family together while he himself fell apart. Judge Caprio slowly removed his glasses, a gesture his followers know well, and placed them on the wooden bench. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hands, visibly moved by the story. He looked at Inspector Quinn, the head of security, who was standing beside the bench. Quinn, usually a man of few words, with a rigid posture and a stern expression, had tears in his eyes and nodded slightly and respectfully to the judge, silently confirming that the boy's story held true, that there was no malice or deceit in his eyes, only devastating human exhaustion. Daniel, Judge Caprio began, his voice now choked with an emotion he rarely let show so openly in court. He spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. You are carrying a weight that men twice your age and with twice your life experience would break trying to lift. You lost your father, your hero, just 6 months ago. You are caring for your ailing mother with a dedication that is rare to see these days. And at the same time, you are trying to build a future for yourself through education in a very difficult course. That is noble. That is admirable. That says a lot about your character and the upbringing your parents gave you. The judge paused for a long time, letting his words of validation sink into the weary mind of the young man, who seemed not to have heard praise in months. But I need you to listen to me very carefully now, son. What I am about to say is more important than any fine, any traffic rule, or any law written in a book. But before I tell you what Judge Caprio said next, the unexpected and powerful lesson that changed everyone's perspective in the room and redefined the concept of justice for millions, I need you to do something important for our community. In the comments below, I want you to answer a difficult and honest question. To what extent should the law be flexible in the face of extreme human suffering? Do you think survival and family love justify breaking the law, Or should public safety always come first? Leave your honest opinion and say where you are watching this video from, whether it's Brazil, Portugal, the United States, or anywhere else. Because this discussion is global and affects us all. Back in the courtroom, the moment was critical, the tension was at its peak. Daniel's fate hung in the balance, suspended by a thread. Judge Caprio looked deeply into Daniel's red eyes and continued, with a tone of urgency. You're trying to be your family's hero, Daniel, and you are. You're sacrificing yourself in a way few would. But you need to understand a fundamental truth: a dead hero can't save anyone. A hero in a hospital bed can't pay the rent. If you continue at this insane pace, sleeping 3 hours a night, driving exhausted, racing against the clock and against your own biology, you won't graduate in engineering. You'll end up hugging a telephone pole, or worse, you'll kill a child crossing the street and destroy 2 families, hers and yours. And then I ask you, who will take care of your mother if you're not here? Who will honor your father's memory if you destroy yourself? The question was a brutal shock of reality. Daniel quickly raised his head, tears now flowing freely, soaking his shirt. He had never thought of it this way. He was in survival mode, just reacting, running, trying not to sink. The prospect of his own mortality and its impact on his mother hit him hard. I don't want to punish you for trying to help your family, Caprio said, his voice soft but firm. The justice system wasn't made to crush people who are already on the ground bleeding. But I have a sacred responsibility to the public safety of this city. I have a moral and legal dilemma before me. It was then that Judge Caprio did something that defines his legacy and explains why he is loved worldwide. He didn't look to the penal code for the answer. He looked to the human potential before him. You said you want to be an engineer. What kind of engineer, specifically? Daniel, surprised and somewhat disarmed by the sudden change of subject, stammered, wiping his face. Civil engineer, sir. I want to build things that last: bridges, roads, safe homes for people who have nowhere to live. Caprio smiled, and it was a genuine, warm smile that lit up his tired face. The world desperately needs builders, Daniel. We need people who build bridges, not walls. We need you. But we need you alive, healthy, and awake to do it. The judge picked up the heavy wooden gavel, held it in the air, but didn't strike yet. The suspense was agonizing. I'm going to make a deal with you today. It's not a traditional sentence, it's a pact between 2 men. The entire court leaned forward in unison, collectively holding their breath, awaiting the verdict. I will use my judicial discretion to waive all of these fines. Every penny. That's almost $1,000 in infractions and fees that I'm going to clear from your record right now. You'll leave here owing nothing to the state. An audible sigh, almost a stifled cry of relief, echoed through the room. Daniel looked like he was about to faint right there. His knees buckled slightly, his legs trembled, and he gripped the edges of the podium for support to avoid falling. Thank you, Your Honor, my God, thank you, He began to stammer, his gratitude overflowing, but Caprio raised his hand, asking for silence. Wait, I'm not finished yet. There's a strict condition for this, and that condition is non-negotiable. If you break it, the deal is off. The judge became serious again, his eyes fixed on the young man. You're leaving here today and you're going to reorganize your life immediately. I don't know how you're going to manage the logistics, but you need to sleep. Humans don't function without sleep. You need to find help. Maybe talk to your university's assistance department. Maybe look into social programs from the city for your mother. But you can't, under any circumstances, continue driving like a zombie through the streets of my city. If I see your name in my courtroom again because of exhaustion, speeding, or recklessness, the agreement is over and you'll lose your license. Do you understand the gravity of this? Daniel nodded vigorously, a new determination shining in his moist eyes. I understand, Judge. I understand perfectly, I promise. I'll figure it out. I'll seek help. And there's one more thing, Caprio added with a mischievous and hopeful glint in his eye. When you graduate, and I know you will graduate because you have the grit of a winner, when you hold that engineering diploma in your hand and are wearing your gown, I want you to come back here. I want you to come to my courtroom, not as a defendant, but as my honored guest. Walk through that door and show me that you made it. I want you to prove to me that I was right to bet on you today. Promise. I promise, Judge Caprio. I swear on my father's memory, said Daniel, now crying not from sadness but from purifying relief and immense gratitude. Judge Caprio raised his gavel and struck it firmly, the sound echoing like a starting gun for a new life. Case closed? Go home, son. Give your mother a big hug, tell her Judge Caprio sends his regards, and for God's sake, go to sleep. The sound of the gavel at that moment didn't sound like a condemnation, but like the breaking of invisible chains that bound that young man. The courtroom erupted in applause, not the polite protocol applause, but a spontaneous, thunderous, and emotional ovation. People in the gallery were openly wiping their eyes. Inspector Quinn smiled broadly, a rare sight, and even patted Daniel on the back as he passed. Daniel stood there for a moment, stunned, absorbing what had just happened. He had entered the courtroom that gray morning expecting to have his life destroyed, his wallet confiscated, and his future canceled, and he left with his dignity restored, his debt forgiven, and most importantly, with hope rekindled in his heart. 6 months later, the consequences of that rainy morning and that compassionate decision still reverberated in ways no one could have predicted. Daniel kept his word. He contacted the university student assistance department that same week. Upon learning of his critical situation, counselors managed to get him into an emergency housing assistance grant program and connected his mother to a social services program that provided home caregivers twice a week. This support allowed him to quit his dangerous night shift job and keep only his reduced hours job at the warehouse. With more time to sleep, rest, and study, his already good grades became excellent, placing him on the dean's shortlist. Daniel's mother, with reduced financial stress and seeing her son healthier, began to respond better to medical treatment. Judge Caprio's decision didn't just save a driver's license or forgive a fine, it literally saved an entire family from total collapse and prevented a tragedy waiting to happen on the roads. 2.5 years later, on a bright, sunny spring afternoon, the courtroom door opened and a familiar figure entered. It was no longer the frightened boy in baggy clothes with deep dark circles under his eyes. He was a young man, standing erect, wearing a blue graduation gown and a mortarboard. Daniel Oliveira walked down the central aisle, confident, radiant, holding his civil engineering diploma in both hands as if it were a golden trophy. The courtroom stopped. When Judge Caprio, now 2 years older but with the same attentive gaze, recognized him, the smile that lit up the old magistrate's face was worth more than any salary or prize. Daniel was invited to step onto the bench. They greeted each other with a firm, warm handshake, a meeting of generations and shared purposes. Daniel handed the judge a photo from that graduation moment, with a handwritten dedication on the back that read, "To Judge Frank Caprio. Thank you for not only applying the law but for applying humanity. Thank you for building the bridge that allowed me to cross my darkest abyss. This diploma is also yours." Judge Caprio, visibly moved, showed the photo to the packed courtroom and said, "This is why we do what we do. Justice is not about punishment. It's about correction and opportunity." The story of Daniel and Judge Caprio teaches us a powerful and universal lesson that transcends borders, languages, and legal codes. It reminds us that true justice is not blind. As the saying goes, it needs to see. It needs to see the pain, the effort, the context, and the pulsating humanity behind the mistakes. It shows that sometimes what a supposed criminal or offender needs is not a cold cell, more debt, or a moral lesson, but an outstretched hand, a listening ear, and someone in authority who believes, even for a brief moment, that they can be better than their worst mistake. Judge Caprio could have followed the cold letter of the law on that rainy day. He would have been technically right, and no one could criticize him. But by choosing compassion and empathy, he was morally, spiritually, and humanly right, and the world became a little better, a little fairer, and a little brighter because of it. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe a little more in human kindness and the power of second chances, please like this video right now. This greatly helps spread this vital message of hope to those who need it. Share this video with your friends, your family, or anyone who is going through a difficult time and needs to know that better days will come, that the storm will pass, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting, real, and transformative stories like this one. Always remember the unspoken words, but live daily by Judge Frank Caprio. We are not here to judge people for their worst day, but to help them achieve their best days. God be with you, drive safely, take care of each other, and until the next story.